It's December the 24th. I wanted to talk about something that just happened in Myanmar and give background information and experience on a UN Security Council censure of the Myanmar Junta. This was posted December 23rd, originally published the 21st. So it looks like the resolution was adopted on the 21st. First, I apologize. This is not a high-quality video. I'm not a very interesting person. This is not a professional channel. I'm trying to share information. Every once in a while, I've posted videos on the situation in Myanmar. Some of them have gotten removed, or at least they're not searchable and you can't find them. Because it's a controversial situation. Right, and I give opinions that are different than the narrative because my experience has been different. Who am I? I am an American expat living in Myanmar. Came here first in 2014, ended up opening a school in 2016. Coronavirus, we're not really back to operating anywhere near fully, right? We have a couple classes online. However, in having a school, we had developed a side business that we help Myanmar students find a university in the U.S. and go to the U.S. to study. So that's how I survive here. I am a military veteran, and I was a civil affairs captain in the Army, which I believe is relevant to the way I analyze things that are going on in countries like this. I have conducted military anthropology for the Army, I believe, quite successfully. I feel my past military research has been very successful. I was intending on, I'm still intending on writing an academic paper on the situation here. And I was planning to make a video after I leave the country because it would be a lot safer. But this thing coming up has things I want to address that are going to make a lot of people angry because there's so many different groups with different vested interests. There's no way to make people happy. I'm just going to give my opinions, right? Some might make the Army angry. I apologize. I would say that overall, in this situation, I still feel that the Myanmar military is the only people that can successfully lead this country. I'll get more into the details of why I think that later, but that first point's going to piss off a lot of people. For all the Myanmar people that are going to hate me for that, keep in mind who gave me a visa to come to Myanmar. Who is my boss that allows me to be here, right? Not my boss, but in a way my owner. Myanmar military can ask me to leave any day they feel like it, and I have no choice but to leave. But I love Myanmar, and I love staying here. So I'm not going to be what I would call overly critical of the Myanmar military. In fact, I'm going to explain my perspective on a lot of their actions, being a military veteran who I think can relate to the way military officers make decisions. So, where to start? I read a paper the other day written by an Australian academic. I apologize. I didn't think to look his name up before starting to record this, and I don't know how to edit these videos. I'm making one recording and that's it. So I'm not going to make you sit there while I look for that paper. But he made this point about Myanmar had been through all of these different kinds of governments in its history. And was he technically correct? Yes. However, some of those governments lasted days or weeks, right? You really can't count it. If you look at the history of Myanmar, going back to, say, beginning of recorded history, Mon empires, Mon control, Myanmar, whether ruled under the Mon or the Burma, were some short periods where you had some powerful Shan kings. Myanmar has always been under military rule. Now, this guy tried to argue that the British colonial period was civil administration. I have to completely disagree. Yes, that period was not the Dutch East India Company. However, any colony that had active resistance against the crown wasn't really administered as a civil administration, right? When you look at the guys that were, and England never controlled, or the UK, whatever you want to call it, never controlled all of Myanmar. Similar to India, they controlled the cities and the highways, right? Transportation routes of importance. Sure, if somebody gave a problem in the countryside, they would raise a superior military force and go out and put it down, but that is not the same thing as control. When there was not an active military fight in an area, there was zero representation from the British in most of the villages, and those villages were governing themselves. When you look prior to the British being able to take control of what has become the border of Myanmar, I don't think any kingdom in Myanmar history ever controlled all the same regions at the same time. And there's some regions in Kachin State and Chin State that I think were never under control of any Burma kings, as far as I can tell. Now, I would love to talk with a Myanmar historian about that. So this is a hodgepodge of ethnic groups in this country. And the reason it's been able to exist like that is the terrain, right? If you go into Kachin and Chin states, one valley to another valley, these villages don't just speak different languages. They have different language families, right? We're inferring over 20,000 years of separation, right? Hindi is an Indo-European language, right? Many of the languages, Iranian is an Indo-European language, if I remember right. I might be mistaken in that, but I'm 99% sure, right? So the English language is more related to Hindi than one village to the next village in Myanmar. And when you look at the terrain, you figure out why that is. Some of it's just, frankly, impossible. So it's hard to take military control of regions that you can defend with small amounts of people, and we saw that in Afghanistan. Like over Kunar Kunduz, there's mountain passes that you could try to send an army division to take it, and a couple dozen guys with rocks could defend it. Just because, there's corridors, you got 15 feet, and you got 5,000 feet straight up, 5,000 feet straight up, right? That is being in a bucket. Similar to the movie 300, or the story 300. Historic event. Anyway, so because of Myanmar's terrain, we have this situation of these multiple ethnic groups that have never really ever been united in history. And some of those ethnic groups began fighting the central government of Myanmar as soon as they got independence from England. So we've got multiple insurgent groups of multiple ethnic backgrounds, right? Chin Kachin are mostly Christian. However, especially within Kachin State, there are multiple other ethnicities that get labeled as Kachin because they're within the geographic state of Kachin, but they are not at all related to the Kachin people. And many of them despise and hate and have had wars for thousands of years against them also. And these are not little wars. Like, these guys are real warriors. I've been up into Katanchin and seen 70-year-old guys walking around with swords that I was not gonna fuck with them in any fucking way, because it doesn't matter the combat I've seen. Those guys were warriors that put me to shame. That was obvious just looking at them. Right? They've been able to hold their terrain for as long as anybody. There's no idea of how long they've been in that area. When the Burma took over Myanmar, they really just passed through Chin and Kachin and then attacked the kingdoms down in the south and took over the southern regions first. Because that terrain's just impossible. Because of that, in World War II, Eisenhower considered Myanmar to be the key terrain of the war in the Burma-India-China campaign. The Burma-India-China campaign was the most fatal campaign in World War II. More allies and more Japanese died in Myanmar than anywhere else in any of the other campaigns. Please look that up. It's good information. And the thing is, it wasn't only Eisenhower that recognized the importance of the terrain of northern Myanmar, right? Hirohito agreed. That's why he moved so many of his soldiers off of the islands to Myanmar to fight Myanmar, which allowed us to more easily attack the islands and island hop. If those islands were fully staffed as intended to be, that fight would have been a whole lot harder. I think I can pause this. So I've made a breakthrough. I can pause the video while I record. Some of you might already be getting bored with the history of World War II, but this is directly related to this Security Council resolution and why it might have a terribly negative effect on U.S. global strategy against China. So, not only did Eisenhower and Hirohito consider the terrain of Myanmar to be key terrain, and I'll try to spare you more history. Maybe I'll make another video and explain more because it is interesting to people who like history. So anyway, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong also took the same position. This is why northern Myanmar became so important. It was terrain, the most difficult terrain to take, very easy terrain to control once you had it. And it gave a supply line that we could supply the Chinese to fight the Japanese. And the Japanese had no choice but to try to cut off that supply line. But the thing is, so Mao, being the brilliant, evil person that he was, he felt that once, he had control of mainland China, that the Myanmar highlands are actually the greatest threat to China. If you want to attack China, the Myanmar highlands are a phenomenal place to do it. If you have a two-tiered approach, the coast and the highland Myanmar highlands, China has to break up their military into two entirely different fronts, fighting two entirely different types of warfare, which China and Myanmar have had a couple wars since World War II, and Myanmar's won them all. They were bloody wars. I've talked to some of the veterans, but it seems like China never had a fucking chance, which I have to agree. I've been to the Stillwell Road, and I've looked at it. It's a beautiful fucking invasion route that the Chinese are maintaining. They maintain it because they rape Myanmar of resources and economic advantages. That's going to, again, be related into all of this. So Mao had a strategy that China's position would be to close hold Myanmar and keep it constantly destabilized. So since then, China has been playing the Myanmar government, the military, and the ethnic groups against each other. And they've successfully destabilized Myanmar this entire time. The U.S. and the West have been entirely failure diplomatically in Myanmar because, we care about our agenda and not at all about seeing anything from their own perspectives of their own problems. We don't prioritize policies. I'll shut up on why we're a diplomatic failure. So I don't insult friends any worse than I already have. So China maintains a destabilization policy in Myanmar that the West supports by basically just not doing anything about it. So the U.S. policy for a long time was to support Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi is a brilliant woman and a brilliant politician. However, she's also, from my opinion, again, this is something that's going to piss off a lot of people, an angry old woman driven by vengeance and a desire for revenge against those who murdered her father and basically destroyed her life on an individual level. So the people of Myanmar have long wanted democracy, but the education here is absolutely terrible, and I'm pretty sure everybody in Myanmar will agree with that. They won't agree with my phrase, though, that they don't know what that means. Basically, there's a lot of long-term hate against the army for past crimes, and the pro-democracy movement, spearheaded by the NLD, the National League for Democracy, run by Aung San Suu Kyi, was the primary opposition force. So because of that being the primary opposition force, despite having multiple parties, most of the ethnic groups backed the NLD. Now the NLD, it's not the democracy of freedom that Americans like to first assume. It was a socialist democracy party. Even though so many Americans might feel sympathy for that now, that's something to keep in mind, that the U.S. government has been supporting it all this time and supporting her. So in 2014, when I first came here, the government was finishing up a constitution to create a democratic republic in which the army maintained veto power through maintaining a control over a slight majority of these seats within, Congress. They had a rule that the president could not be someone who was married to a foreigner. Myanmar is a culture that's always been highly suspicious of foreigners, with the exception of Chinese, that they allow to just bend over and fuck them in the ass whenever they feel like it. And no matter how offensive those words are, pretty much every Myanmar person I've ever talked to agrees with that statement. They don't agree with it happening. They're all very angry about it. So they got democracy. And I believe within 48 hours, they decided to create a position on top of the president, in which they put Aung San Suu Kyi into that position with no term limits, right? So they got democracy, and they created a queen immediately. So she governed, quite a bit. Good things, bad things. Again, she's a very astute politician. She did some very good things, and very amazing at weakening China. Not weakening them, but allowing them less control. And keep in mind, there's Chinese mercenaries running around northern Myanmar. They're armed. They have their own military force. I have seen what I believe to be a Blackwater-related group of people that I believe are hired for security for the Chinese pipeline that I'm going to get into as to why this is all important. It's a pipeline and a train line. I think a lot more coming. Anyway, so she's building power. I was here before the election. I saw very astute, and Myanmar culture is a very, very socially brilliant culture, right? They've got social skills beyond what the West can relate to. You can have something happen in Yangon, and this is what foreigners who were here before cell phones have told me, that within hours, that the people in Mandalay would know what happened in Yangon just by direct word of mouth. And this was a foreigner who owned businesses in both Yangon and Mandalay. That's impressive. And the way everything works here is through social manipulation. So during the election was very, very aggressive social manipulation on the part of the NLD. People were not allowed to openly speak against the NLD without being threatened, socially threatened, by the majority of the society around them, right? So I did not see a fair election, in my opinion. However, that unfairness was on the part of the NLD, not on the part of the military, from my perspective. Now, probably everybody was cheating in some way. But what I saw was, people who do support the military are not free to say that outside of the circles of people who support the military. And it's a lot more than just people think, especially in the countryside. So if I were to make an estimate off my head, I would say maybe 15% of people support the military and 85% would like to see them put on their knees and executed. So we're going to get to why that's why I support the military and not the insurgents. So anyway, after the election was the coup that the military claimed Aung San Suu Kyi, or the power grab that Aung San Suu Kyi attempted from the military's perspective, which they used as grounds to arrest her and imprison her again, in which all media, other than the military's direct media, calls the military coup against her. So it was a series of things that happened, right? Not as simple as the media, who likes to control your mind, would let you believe. They don't control your mind, they control your perspectives through control of partial, biased information reporting. So anyway, she ends up in jail. There's protests, went on for quite a while. I was amazed how long the protests remained peaceful. There were days and days that people were throwing rocks and glass at soldiers and police, and the soldiers and police did nothing. As a military officer, if I were in the same position, I would have opened fire much sooner. The first shot was a very famous thing in the media. A cute young girl, I don't know, 17, 24, somewhere in there, I forget the details, was shot in the head by a cop on video. The cop looked to me on the video about 30, 40 meters away using an Uzi, an open bolt submachine gun, fired a single shot hitting her in the head. Uzi's obviously a 9mm, if you know anything about guns. She was wearing a bike helmet, which the bike helmets in Myanmar are complete garbage quality. Completely would be illegal in the United States or anywhere else in the world, other than Southeast Asia. I do not believe that was the real shooter. The girl was taking violent action against the police, though, when she was shot. There were x-rays published. It looked to me more like a small caliber rifle round rather than a 9mm. The bullet was lodged in her head. I'm sorry I didn't prepare and collect all this. Maybe I'll learn how to make better fucking videos and redo it. Somebody will probably kill me first. But afterwards, right, so we had all these different ethnic insurgent groups, right? Some are Buddhist, in Rakhine they're Buddhists, right? You've got Islamic insurgent groups also in Rakhine. Chin are mostly Christians, Kachins are mostly Christians, Karens, Kians are mostly Christians. So most of the insurgencies are not really religiously driven, but those groups that converted to Christianity easily get outside support by foreign religious groups, which increases the amount of suspicion that the central government, which is mostly Burmese, Burma Buddhist people, so it's, other than the Islamic insurgency, it's not a religious war. They're just ethnic control of land. These other little groups want to be independent, but they can't. If they were independent, they would be tiny landlocked countries and they would become slaves to China right away. So I can't support independence of any of these groups. You can support, a Myanmar government that cooperates between all the ethnic groups a whole lot better. Maybe some joint power sharing. But I'm a foreigner with no opinion, except that I love Myanmar, I love the United States, and I want us to be closer. And one way for that to happen would be for Myanmar to come up with a way to undermine and end the ethnic insurgencies, because that's, the State Department keeps fucking up. The State Department's against military governance, saying you need to give up your power and give power to these other people. Like, no, they're never going to do that. Again, all of Myanmar history has been military rule. We have to find a friendly balance that works for everybody, right? And one that doesn't bend over for China and give China all the advantages that just rapes Myanmar of all of its economic strength constantly. That does not allow China to keep Myanmar as a destabilized country, because as long as outside forces are keeping Myanmar destabilized, the international community is never going to accomplish anything, and this censure is just garbage, in my opinion. But we'll continue with that. So we had all these different insurgent groups going on since World War II. Technically, they're just the lasting of wars that have been gone forever. However, they were starting to cooperate, right? In the years leading up to this, say the last 10 years at least, these different insurgent groups were having sharing of forces. They would send people to each other's training camps. They were starting to have joint cooperation in military planning. They were already becoming a more serious threat to the central government in their greater professionalization. So when this series of coups happened, I'll use this for coup and not for series of coups, as I believe that's more accurate. That created now the majority ethnic group of Burma people to start running to the ethnic insurgent groups and joining them, because now they wanted to fight the central government. It also led to the establishment of multiple additional insurgent groups that go under the umbrella of the PDF, the People's Defense Forces, which is kind of like a confederacy of militias. However, it is supported and has become kind of a coordinating backbone between all those other insurgent groups, basically enabling them to be more successful, because it's the PDF, which is part of the National Unity Government, is the shadow government that has been established by the Burma insurgent supporters. Is good at raising money that those other groups never got the likes of before. They're trying to develop their own government, but from my experience, what I've seen is people support them, give them money. When those people get in trouble, they get abandoned and forgotten. All right, it's just another group of people trying to take power. And the problem is with the NUG and the PDF is if they win, the result is to execute anybody with any affiliation with the military. Well, that is not going to help to stabilize the country, and we saw in Iraq what happens when you get rid of everybody who knows how to run a country. You destabilize it more. Therefore, none of the options put on the table by any of the opposition groups have any capability of possible success of governance should they win, in my opinion. So by default, in the fact that I've fought terrorists and I hate terrorists, I have seen destabilized countries, and I don't want it for a country that I love. I want Myanmar to be stable. Right now, the only group that has any possibility outcome from is the standing government controlled by the military right now. It's a de facto, there's no decision in it, right? So all of our policies, are on the destabilization side. So let's get into this joint resolution. I'll read a little bit of it for you. UN Security Council historic censure of Myanmar Junta. Myanmar is the correct pronunciation, but as I'm reading, I won't slow down to be correct as much. The United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution on December 21st, 2022, denouncing the Myanmar military's rights violations since the February 1st, 2021 coup, Human Rights Watch said today. The landmark resolution, so we have manipulation of language, in civil affairs, when you're analyzing media, you have to look at manipulation of words to see how much they're trying to steer you away from straight data in which direction, right? Key words. So the landmark resolution, passed with 12 yes votes and 3 abstentions, reflects the Myanmar junta's growing isolation generated by security force abuses amounting to crimes against humanity and war crimes. I don't think Russia or China give a fuck about crimes against humanity or war crimes. I'm pretty sure they abstained because they've got their own more important issues to them right now than Myanmar. Now, one thing Min Aung Hlaing, the general in control, has been doing is been trying to make a better relationship with Russia. And the U.S. naturally is against that. However, I would say that is better for the people of Myanmar, because Russia has no desire to destabilize Myanmar. It has no desire to take advantage of Myanmar any more than they sell weapons in other countries, right? Russia has nothing to gain. So Russia, is a better partner for Myanmar than China. And being that, sure, are we at a threat-to-threat place with Russia right now? Yes, but Putin's got his goals of a world balance, going back to a dualistic world power. So he kind of wants the same thing we want in that way. At the same time, China has an intent to destroy the United States, along with every other country in the world, and make the entire world a Chinese communist dictatorship. They say that in their own media every single day. So if you don't believe that China is waging an asymmetrical war against the United States, stop watching me and just go back to your dreamland. China's the bigger enemy to the United States right now. So getting Myanmar to go more into Russia's corner would give them leverage to sever the negative Chinese influence. That, by the way, one of the reasons we have so many problems here is China pressures Myanmar to make it difficult to have any success in Myanmar. Say, for example, approving things that I don't know that are secret or not, so I can't say. But the people who matter will know approving is enough of a word. Get back to this. So it is the first Security Council resolution on Myanmar since the country, formerly known as Burma, acquired independence from Britain in 1948. Guess Britain must be the correct word, not England or the UK. And in quotes, the Security Council resolution is a momentous step on behalf of the people of Myanmar. Called bullshit on that one. Opening the door toward holding Myanmar's brutal generals to account. End quote, said Elaine Pearson, Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, a biased organization. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. They've got to make things look worse to get more money for themselves. Again, in quotes, the resolution should bring renewed security to the junta's daily atrocities and recognition of the Myanmar people's brave efforts towards democracy and freedom. End quotes. I can believe there's some brave efforts, right? The resolution which the United Kingdom drafted under the UN Charter's Chapter 6 concerning Pacific settlement of disputes expresses deep concern at the ongoing state of emergency imposed by the military in Myanmar on 1st February 2021 and its grave impact on the people of Myanmar. Grave impact. It condemns the military's execution of pro-democracy activists, urges the military to immediately release all arbitrarily detained prisoners, and demands an immediate end to all forms of violence throughout the country. So we're getting biased stuff again here. These pronouns, not pronouns, adjectives. So this ignores there's multiple perspectives and all sides have made drastic mistakes. All sides are killing each other in very brutal and horrific ways, right? One of the things Myanmar people are great at is psychological warfare. For propaganda, they have this natural gift. Any random Myanmar person on the street is just brilliant at generating propaganda. I'm blown away. And again, I've participated in psychological operations planning for the U.S. government in other countries, not in Myanmar. I have never done anything for the U.S. government in Myanmar. I'm not going to shit where I eat. However, I love Myanmar. I love the U.S. I'm going to say things that I hope can make our relationship better. And I hate how China's a threat to us both, so I'm going to try to say things that might entice people to stop allowing China to hurt both of our countries and the rest of the world aggressively and actively. Again, this is drafted by the United Kingdom, the former colonizer. That's not going to help any legitimacy in the eyes of the Myanmar people, right? They're just going to completely ignore it, right? Our colonizers just want to control us again. It condemns the military's execution of pro-democracy activists. Yeah, activists have been killed. And those activists actively participated in things that have gotten Myanmar soldiers killed and innocent Myanmar people killed. Another reason why I don't support the insurgencies. I don't support any fucking insurgent group that blames the people for bowing to those who control them by force, right? So these insurgent groups, the PDF, kills innocent fucking Myanmar people that actually like and support them because their jobs might put them in a position, right, where they're not going to survive if they don't do what the government and the military wants. You can't blame those people and expect moral legitimacy. You are equally to blame. Once every insurgent group stops killing innocent Myanmar people, maybe I'll be able to listen a little bit better. But I'm not going to blame one side for what the other's doing, because again, I've been a soldier fighting terrorists. Terrorists who hide behind innocent people. Terrorists who kill innocent people to try to make them turn against me. So I have no sympathy, right? Of course, I'm going to sympathize with the army, who's actually, most of them, or at least a good portion of them, actually desire to protect the Myanmar people. I've watched them outside risk their own lives to protect the people that are trying to kill them. I've seen it, okay? So yes, some pro-democracy activists have been murdered, but I have not seen many people I would really call innocent as getting murdered. Now, I don't see a lot, right? Sure, we'll get into the numbers in a minute. Could have been lots of innocent people murdered that I didn't see. But what I have seen, what I have been exposed to, and what I've heard from people on both sides, or the many sides, is a lot of these people did something at some point. You know, their hands were not completely clean. They might not have killed anybody themselves, but they participated in planning or economically supported, you know, getting weapons to the people that actually took the actions. The immediately release of all arbitrarily detained prisoners. Coming up with arbitrary, I don't know how to criticize that word on either end. Could be, but I'm sure a lot of the people jailed for a reason. And it's not like if they're guilty, they're going to die in the jail pretty easily. So if they're being detained long term, maybe there is some arbitrariness to, maybe it's just difficult to get evidence because 85% of the society is against, right? They're not going to have people come out as witnesses that easily. Demands an immediate end to forms of violence throughout the country. I agree 100%. Only way for that to happen is every insurgent to lay down their arms, and that's not going to happen without creating, you know, a way to work together first. A mutually beneficial way. And Myanmar people are always saying they want a federal government. I believe, again, we have a problem with education and language. What I really think they're looking for is more of a confederacy of a weak central government and strong states that would, you know, have a good amount of independence, their own security, right? Instead of a highly centralized federal government, which basically hands power to a small number of people by default in the nature of the design of a federation. The resolution includes numerous references to the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, which adopted a 5-point consensus in April 2021 in response to the Myanmar coup. Junta Chief Senior General Min Aung Hlaing has since defied each point to the consensus while exploiting the international community's deference to the regional bloc. There's no deference to the regional bloc. We're not in control. No Western power has any power in Southeast Asia beyond how much those governments choose to cooperate with us for their own military gain, right? Indonesia is a huge, close military friend and a military power to be reckoned with. Myanmar could be just as much if they could, you know, find a government and leadership that could stabilize the country. From a Southeast Asian perspective in general, they don't give much credence to any outside group having much opinion on internal affairs. And Myanmar, the more negative you do, you're just pushing them more out of your ability to influence them. Right? You got to be really careful in your criticisms when criticizing any Southeast Asian people. Because they're okay to suffer to a much greater degree than anybody else in the world. Maybe Africa. Huge overgeneralization. The Secretary General or his special envoy in Myanmar is tasked with reporting orally by March 15, 2023 to the Security Council and the UN for support for implementation of 5-point consensus. Nobody's going to invade Myanmar other than China, right? Nobody has anything to gain from invading Myanmar other than China. So nobody, when you look at a risk-gain scenario, only China is a possible invader of Myanmar. and illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, who are, not really an invasion as they're not organized, as far as I know. All Security Council members voted for the resolution except China, India, and Russia. And again, this group of countries, who would be surprised? Of course they abstained. The junta's widespread and systematic abuses since the coup, including extrajudicial killings, torture, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians, amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes. Okay. One conversation I have a lot is rules of engagement. Sorry this video is so fucking long, but so much to say. So, as an army officer in Afghanistan, I technically had limitless power, right? As long as I had a radio, I had unimaginable firepower behind me, right? I could go out, and I was not civil affairs in Afghanistan, I was civil affairs in Africa. In Afghanistan, I was an engineer. So let's say, though, that I was civil affairs in Afghanistan, and I bring that up because civil affairs is generally not equipped for their own defense. They're in four-man teams. In Afghanistan, should be going out with an infantry security. However, as an engineer, they refuse to go out with us for security, so I'm sure some civil affairs teams that I just haven't talked to probably found themselves alone, 4 guys out in the fucking mountains. So say you're 4 guys out alone in the Afghan mountains, and here comes the fucking Taliban in one of their greatest assaults. Here comes 1,000 fucking fighters. And I'm generalizing Taliban to all the many groups that were there. I'm not going to get into that. So I could come up against 1,000 guys with 4 my guys, right? And as long as I have my radio, within minutes, that I can confirm this situation to be true, every aircraft currently in the air would be coming my direction, fully loaded. Every aircraft on the ground would be getting prepared to launch. And within the amount of time that we would need to be hunkering down behind some giant fucking boulder, calling hell to rear its wings, that was within my capability. The Myanmar army doesn't have that. They do not have, they have a little bit of advantage, right? They've got air that the insurgent groups don't have, although some of the insurgent groups, like the WA, have surface-to-air missiles and have their own air capabilities. In the north, the KIA, they don't have aircraft. They've been begging the U.S. for anti-air for years. And, the things that need to happen for that to happen haven't happened yet. But very likely could happen very fast, should certain key things happen. And that's something that the Myanmar army needs to keep in mind, so that maybe the Myanmar army will be more likely to sit down at the table with the other groups in Myanmar. Right? I'm not telling you to sit down with the United States. I know you're not going to do that. So they don't have that, right? A Myanmar army infantry squad goes out on their own. They are on their own. They can't go into a village and handle things the way we handle things, where we then, get 1 or 2 people and we leave the village. If we as Americans did not have superior firepower, like some situations in the past, say World War II and Vietnam, if we found ourselves in a situation where we were outgunned and strolled into a village that we thought if we walk out of it without killing everybody, that we're not going to survive. Let me tell you, every human that's ever served in war knows what decision they would make if they thought they were guaranteed death if they don't kill a large number of people that are not openly fighting them back. However, in these cases, this bias, they are getting fought back, right? They're not going into peaceful villages like in Rambo and just killing a bunch of people that can't defend themselves. I mean the Rambo that took place in Myanmar. And, you know, honestly, he did more for the independence movement of the previous government than anybody else, in that he shamed Myanmar publicly. But, so this next line, security forces have killed over 2,600 people and arbitrarily, again, arrested over 16,000, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. Well, what is the source for this? It just happens a couple weeks ago. You know, that source came out with a report. They've been coming out quarterly. The UN, you know, Relief Web publishes it. So, you know, it was 2,413 at the time of the last report on November 22nd. It's December 24th, so another one's come out that I haven't read yet. 2,400 to 2,600, okay. Fine. 2,600 killed. I'll accept that. It could be a lie, maybe not. Because the people reporting it are the opposition. No chance they lie. And, you know, pack the numbers a little. I'll keep in mind, that's not 2,600 innocent people taken out and put on their knees and executed. A large portion of that were insurgents engaged in open combat, mostly that were in the process of guerrilla attacks against the Myanmar forces. So, how many of them are innocent? I don't think very many. And again, they're brilliant at propaganda. I saw the video that Karens came out with a month ago of the Myanmar aircraft bombing a village, and they had all the children, you know, lined up in a trench. And the children are crying, such a moving video. But they tried to edit it out, but didn't do perfectly. There were some people dressed in camouflage with them in that trench. So, it wasn't the innocent teachers, you know, wearing longis, Myanmar clothes, bringing kids out to hide. It was insurgents shielding themselves behind children. So, 2,600 number, right? More insurgents you kill, the better. And if we want to look at it, I mean, Myanmar, despite insurgencies for the last 50 years, is one of the safest countries in the world, especially for a foreigner. Holy shit. Foreigners don't get killed here, unless a foreigner kills a foreigner. $2,600 people. You know, I used to live in Philadelphia. I just saw a news report earlier. It's the end of the year. Body counts at 500 murders for the year. Yangon's a city of 6 million people, roughly, I believe. About the same size as Philly. Yangon has a couple murders a month, historically, right? We add in, you know, this is 2,600, not this year, right? The Philly number is this year 500. They're going back to February 2021, right? So almost 2 years. In almost 2 years, almost as many people have been murdered in Philly. And if we remove the insurgent portion, and let's say we remove, you know, police killing armed people in Philly, and look at, you know, deaths of innocent people by, you know, Philly gangbangers, or in here, in non-insurgents being killed in crossfire, or in maybe execution, who knows? The amount of dead in Philly alone is almost as much as Myanmar's being criticized for by the world. All right, let's take Philly, New York, Chicago, LA. It fucking eclipses any of the violence going on in Myanmar. Eclipses it. So we're just quite openly hypocrites. Let's see. The The military has expanded abusive operations in ethnic minority areas, displacing more than 1 million people, and deliberately blocked humanitarian assistance from reaching populations in need as a form of collective punishment. Well, human displacement, again, who's running those numbers? The people who give them aid, who build them shelter. And one of the things in civil affairs, right, when people get displaced from a village, they're pushed out by violence, you want to try to get them back to the village as soon as possible. Because what happens is the people that want peace leave, and the people who want violence stay. And if you allow them to make permanent residence in camps, then you're never going to get peace to come back, right? But these organizations, they want money. So what do they need? Higher numbers of people they have to support. I don't know if you've ever been to a UNHCR camp. They're not nice. They're not taking care of people. They're embezzling money like you can't believe. How many exactly displaced? I don't know, but need to stop trying to. We do everything in reverse of what would bring peace, and then we blame them. Let's see how much more. Activists in Myanmar have pressed for a Security Council resolution on the country for decades. China and Russia vetoed a 2007 draft condemning the then military government's attack on civilians and detention of political prisoners. Calls for resolution by UN experts, human rights groups, and others in response to the atrocities against the Rohingya. Again, I made another video about that. Went unanswered. One of the things is the Myanmar people have been crying out to the outside world for help. But they're never going to get the help they want, right? They want the United States to come in and deliver the freedom package. They're not going to get that. It's not worth American lives in the current situation unless this resolution, what I think is going to come out of it, happens. If so, people are going to die. So, the more Myanmar people complain to the international community, the more we do blacklisting and embargoes that do nothing to hurt the generals. They're getting paid by China millions and millions of dollars. If we wanted to be smart, we would say, hey, let us pay you double what China's paying you. Then we might get somewhere. Everything the international community does hurts the Myanmar people 1,000 times more than it hurts any of the people that we say that we're trying to hurt. Because we're just stupid politicians and bureaucrats that, can't do anything successful, coming up with all these strategies and nonsense. Am I a disgruntled veteran? Yeah, not really disgruntled. I'm just angry when I see stupid mistakes. I wish and hope that we can get over them by, people trying to bring some rational, different opinions into the conversation. Okay, so what is this going to lead to? So there's another article, I closed it already, made by someone in the UN, basically a couple days prior, calling that for military action. But what is the problem of Myanmar, again, is China, right? So this is the key terrain of Asia, of an Asia war. Our strategy is to contain China in the South China Sea. However, they're building pipelines and rail lines and roads to the Indian Ocean around a place called Sitwe, where's all that news about the Rohingya. Right? So if China gets direct access to the Indian Ocean, they've undermined our strategy. And what's going to happen, all of these things that we do push Myanmar more into China's lap, more into destabilization. And given one mistake, China's got the ability right now to take direct control of the terrain going to the Indian Ocean. This Security Council resolution is a threat to the entire global strategy to contain China. Am I surprised? So many US politicians and European politicians are in China's pocket. And China didn't vote against it. Oh. I think one other thing I'll mention in this one. Victor Bout. You know, at first I was really pissed off that we released him for, human piece of garbage. And then I realized, I remember, the closing scenes of the movie Lord of War, in which he said, they're going to let me out because the corrupt politicians that I work with need me to help in destabilizing places. So we didn't let him out for her. We let him out because we wanted him released. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if his arms start getting into the hands of these insurgent groups to more severely destabilize Myanmar, to bring more violence and death to the Myanmar people, giving China an open door to take direct control. I'm really, really afraid that's where things are heading. And if that happens, our ability to defeat China gets a whole lot worse if we have to add another campaign into the war. To take a place that really, being the key terrain, we should be propping Myanmar up with money and making them love us. So my last message is to the Myanmar people and the army. Is I understand why the army hates America and isn't going to do anything for America. But please rethink your position with China, because if there's a war with China, we're going to come to Myanmar and we're going to say, hey, the same thing we offered Tan Shui. Please be our ally. But Myanmar chose to be neutral because they didn't want to be against their neighbor that takes advantage and, constantly destabilizing them. If there is a global war, if the United States is not going to start a war with China, we have no interest to do so. But China every day says they're going to attack Taiwan. If that happens, the U.S. has no choice but to fight, right? Our allies have no choice but to fight. If Taiwan falls, the whole world falls, and the whole world belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. We can't let that happen at any cost, at any cost. But China says every day their intent is to attack Taiwan. Their actions, observable actions, back up that they intend to do that for truth. So Myanmar needs to think about this carefully. Because the United States is going to come to Myanmar and ask for access to this key terrain. And Myanmar can say yes or no. And if Myanmar says yes, you get money, right? You get us to build up your country and invest billions and billions of dollars like we have all the other countries that agreed to let us have military operations, right? Like the money China pays you is nothing to the money that everybody in Myanmar is going to make should you choose to be friends with the United States against China. What's going to happen if you say no? Well, KIA loves America. We helped found them in World War II. You go to the U.S. Special Forces Museum. The KIA will agree to let us use their terrain. Because, sure, China funds them and gives them weapons, but they know China's manipulating them at the same time, and I've talked to them, they hate China. And they love us. So, we'll get the terrain, but in order to get there, the U.S. would be forced to bomb Myanmar, which I don't want to see happen in any way, shape, or form. I want us to be friends. I want America to make Myanmar rich through investment and building infrastructure. There's 1,000 ways you could do it. All you got to do is tell us you want it. And I'll talk to people that can make it happen. You wouldn't believe what you could get if you just decided to be friends with us. It would be so easy. But being friends with us means you can't be friends with China. But the U.S. has no advantage in Myanmar other counter than China. We don't want your economy. We don't want your resources. Do you have amazing resources? Yes, but they're not in line with our cultural values. The golden oil you have is not enough. You've got nice reserves, but it's not like the countries that we've bombed to take their resources. Right? We're not going to take control. We like doing businesses with countries. We don't like controlling them. We just like having friends. And look at our friends, right? Korea, Japan, Germany. A lot of money, a lot of development. You should think about it, please. I want to be Myanmar's friend. I want America to be Myanmar's friend. Sounds like maybe somebody's outside my door. I know you watch me every day. And for the foreigners out there, that's not paranoia. You can look into the Myanmar history of intelligence and complete observation of the very small number of foreigners that are here. We're never not being watched. That's why it's such a safe country for us. Nobody can do anything to really hurt an American here, because Myanmar people do believe in taking care of their guests. Not quite as extreme as Afghans, right? Afghans will die for you at the drop of the hat if they're your guest, but Myanmar people will take on a lot of pain and suffering for their guests, and they're not going to let anything happen. If you're given a visa to Myanmar, the government's going to keep you safe. Unless, of course, you're doing something bad against Myanmar. In that case, fuck you.